What's up, everyone? It's Greg here. Today I wanted to do something a little bit different and talk about our songwriting approach. I've received a couple different requests over the past couple weeks to talk a little bit more in depth about how we go about writing. So today we're going to go over a couple of the musical concepts that have really influenced us and driven us to write the way that we do. Now, a lot of these ideas are those that have been learned throughout the years from multiple different teachers and sources, so I claim none of them as my own, but reiterate them only to help you along your songwriting process and also to give kind of a window into how we go about it. So let's jump right in. So the first concept I want to talk about is the idea of tension and release. For those that are experienced musicians, you've probably heard this in some capacity or another, but I came upon it when I started listening to jazz quite a bit more, and a lot of really renowned jazz artists will incorporate this in all sorts of mind-boggling ways, some of which are still far beyond me, but this idea that we can use our 12-note scale, in Western music, and use each one of those notes as words, and tie them together and form a language, is something that's, I think, really important to looking into the way that you start to write. And once it becomes a conscious effort, you can really start to create some beautiful things and be very intentional about the way you go about it. So, to give you an example of how we would apply this, a lot of our songs start off on the 4 chord of a progression. One example, then we can slide down. And that final chord is just such a lovely resolution to, all that questioning we've brought up before. So you can apply this in a lot of different ways. So one form of tension and release that I've found to be really intriguing is the idea of sneaking in notes and chords that don't necessarily belong in your given scale that you're playing. It causes the listener to kind of question everything they've known up to this point about your legitimacy as a writer, and it causes kind of this uneasiness that I can think can be really potent if you use it correctly. But one thing that a guy, Adam Neely, always says is repetition legitimizes. So the first time you play that off note, it's like, what? Where did that come from? Why on earth did they choose to do that? Did they just fuck it up, or is it intentional? And the second time you hit it, it's like, wait a minute, that may have been intended to be there all along. And by going, back to those chords that you know and trust, you can relieve a lot of that tension, but sneaking in those extra little notes can have quite an impact. So So the next concept I want to talk about kind of tails off of the last one, and it's this idea of approaching your music from 2 angles, a question and an answer. And I think, again, depending on what you're trying to say with your composition, this can be utilized in a lot of different ways, but one way that I found is the tension that we talked about in the last concept is often the question, and that resolution or release is the answer. So to give you an example of that, in our song Tall Order, we start off on this G shape here. And then we head down to this E minor. And that carries out throughout the whole song. It's kind of one build after another, and each verse kind of compounds on the next. But to me, that all acts as a question. In fact, from a lyrical perspective, there's a lot of repetition that goes about, but in the second verse, I actually pose the statement, I have a question. With it comes negativity. I want an answer. Maybe that question's not for me. So I tried to tie in both the chordal elements and the lyrical components to meet each other in the middle. But ways that you could resolve that would be going from, say, your G to that B minor shape there. And to me, that's kind of like the answer that you don't want to hear, or it's a darker type of answer. And if you wanted to take it, a lighter direction, ended on that nice D major. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach this. In the next example, I'm going to be talking about something that applies to this as well. So let's head on that way and see where it takes us. So the third idea that I want to talk about is the application of ascension and descension. And this is more from a musical standpoint, but one example that comes to mind is our song Hell There Could Be Worse. With ascension, your notes are going up the scale, and descension, it's going back down. And on the last concept, I talked about this idea of a question and an answer, and I think this plays hand in hand with that concept. So in the opening line, goes a little something like this. So all those notes are climbing up that scale, and then we descend on the next part. And the notes go down. So it's this idea of the question where it's ascending and the answer where it's descending. So kind of the resolution to this part would be the chorus, where it's all an ascension. And those chords are kind of the breath of fresh air. It seems to be the period at the end of this sentence is that touch of positivity. And a lot of our songs tend to have more of a bleak outlook, at least from some of our earlier writings. And nowadays we're trying to really incorporate positive messages and positive elements in ways that will inspire people, both musically and lyrically. So that was really the idea with this song. Is it doesn't have a single word in it, but the idea that you can use these chords and melodies to not only pose questions but provide answers as well. And I think that's done with the ascension and descension of these scales and chord patterns that we're integrating. The final concept I want to talk about today is the idea of motifs. Now, if you're an experienced musician, you already got this down, you understand it, but I think it can be used in some really particular ways that are unique to you. And each musician, no matter what instrument you play, you develop your own way of speaking your truths through your skills, whatever they may be. And regardless of your level of talent, I think there's certain scales and chords that you gravitate towards and ones that resonate more with you. So this idea of using a motif or recurring thematic elements in your music can be really important. One guy by the name of Plini uses this really well, and he has these 3 EPs that all tie together. And when you listen to them separately, you don't really catch it, but when you listen to them as a whole, they're these little elements that tie the whole thing together and act as this glue all across the board. So once I heard that, I was like, I would love to start applying that however I can. In our Natural Position EP, we started to do this with one specific line. It goes a little something like this. So we were able to use this line in 2 different songs, one of which was Tall Order. It kind of like sneaks its way in at the end, but then the next song on the EP, it is the entire thematic drive for the song is that lick right there. And in even some of the newer music that we're writing these days, we'll sneak that in, whether it be in a solo or just a passing kind of reference. But I think if you can start to integrate your motifs and your message in your music, it can really add an extra layer of depth to it that it may not have had before. So give it a go and see what happens. To wrap things up, I figured I'd talk a little bit about our structural approach to songs. So we don't necessarily have one when we start. A lot of times we'll start with a chord progression and see where that takes us, but our songs vary when it comes to their structural components. Sometimes we stick with the classic, intro, verse, bridge, chorus kind of deal, but for Tall Order, for instance, that one is one giant build, and that one kind of has an intro, a verse, an instrumental section, another verse, another instrumental, and then the final verse, and then a guitar solo at the end. So we're not really resolute in the way that we structure our songs, and I think that can add an element of diversity to it, but it's more just kind of following what your intention is and what you're trying to say. If you have a lyrical structure that you start from, and this all depends on your approach to songwriting, that can kind of guide the structure of the song in your message that you want to convey. But a lot of times it's chord structures that lead our process. So for us, it isn't very set in stone the way that we approach that. Every now and then we'll get lucky and a song will just fall together and just have a very natural kind of ease to it. But a lot of times it requires some, give and take, and sometimes we'll cut a section from a song or rearrange things so it has a better flow to it in the end. But I would say when you're approaching your songwriting, just go with what feels best. And I would say don't get caught up on the rigid structure of, pop music for influencing the way that you write. It doesn't have to be a smash hit. Just make sure it's something that is meaningful to you. And I think that's what we've really started to dig into. And of course, we want people to relate with our music, but at the end of the day, this is our form of expression. And so I encourage you to look at it that way. Well, if you've made it this far, I really appreciate you sticking around. Hopefully, This gives you an idea of the way that we approach our songwriting process, and hopefully in the future we can make more videos like this and break down these concepts even further. But if you feel like it, go check out some of our other videos here on our channel. We have all sorts of different original music and tone demonstrations as well that kind of get into the nitty-gritty of our actual sound. So feel free to check those out, and as always, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. We appreciate you, and thank you for your support. Peace.